Okay, I just wanted to go over a couple of things with the mixer brush. Most of the settings I'll talk about in class, but I just wanted to kind of put it into use here. And I'll also be mixing in a few other things like a regular brush and smudge brushes and things like that. So I'm going to do a little quick portrait. So I'm kind of creating an imprimatur here. And one of the things I like about the mixer brush is you can tell it to sample all the layers below it, and you can start painting wet into wet just like oils. And it's a really nice way to start a painting. And I don't have it set right now to sample all layers, but it's got a nice mix on it and a heavy flow and a pretty wet brush. So I'm just sort of varying it. And I just like to play around with this until I just get something I kind of like. It's going to change and everything as I go, but it just sort of kills all the white. So I'll just speed this up a little bit here. I'm just going to switch up my brush here and do a real quick drawing. And here's the reference I'm using for this, just real loosely. And I'm going to come in here now and just block out big areas to give me something to start. This is with the regular brush. And this is a layer underneath the line layer. So I want to keep the color isolated. We've been doing a lot of landscape stuff, so that's why I decided just to change it up and use a person. But you're still getting a lot of abstraction in the beard and the shapes and all that sort of thing. And the edges. And basically all I'm doing here is just blocking out big areas, local color, and maybe a little bit of temperature variation, but that's about it. I'm just trying to kind of get it set up so I'm covering the canvas and getting my subject covered. I'm probably not going to finish out the shirt, but I just want to, again, I want to kill that canvas. And I just picked some real general colors off the original reference to speed it up. And now I'm coming in here with the mixer brush. I've got it set to the mix at 82. I've got it sample all layers, so it's going to pick up everything. It's about 15% wet, and the mix is at about 87, I think. What that's going to do is it's going to start mixing and start softening some edges. And I'm also always trying to kill the drawing also. So I'm sort of covering some of that too. But this is all really general. And you can see, like, when I put some of this stuff, it's really subtle. And I can dial it up a lot harder if I want, but I want to keep it subtle for now. So I'm just shifting things around, adding some lights, just to get a general starting point. And what I like about this is it sort of feels like you're working wet into wet with like oil. And you can really dial it in, how you like it, how much you want it to mix, how you want your edges to happen. And then you got to go and manipulate the edges more after the fact. And I'm just punching some more lights and just really looking for shapes that I can pop in and also unifying big areas. You also have to be careful because you don't want all your edges soft. So I'm going to kind of block this in and then I'll dance over it with a regular brush and start going back and forth. So I switched over to a regular brush, so I'm going to kind of define some areas. And I can always soften an edge or use this brush to get a harder edge, but I got to do that dance. And the mixer brush and our smudge brushes, which I go back and forth with, can accomplish all that. Sometimes I like the way the smudge brush breaks an edge for like a beard or something like that, but I love the wet into wet thing with the mixer brush. So I'm switching over to my smudge brush. This is one I like a lot. It breaks up edges nice. And then eventually I'll go back to my mixer brush. So just keep an eye on the controls up there and you can see what the settings are. So now I've got my mixer brush set up so there's no paint on it, so I can sort of soften edges. And it's a little different. I can really dial this in and get just the type of soft edge I like. Again, just like working in oil. Now I'm going to come here with an eraser and I'm going to sort of recarve his nose a little bit. So I do that a lot, whether it's regular paint or not. Come in and sort of recarve edges and things like that. And I think the background can go get a little darker. But if you notice the bottom of his, or right under his bottom lip, that's getting sort of similar, that value. So I'll have to play around with that. But I want to pop him a little more. And what I have to be careful of when I use a regular brush is that my marks don't get too uniform. So you'll notice I'll go back in and recarve them, soften one little part of them, things like that. I'm going to put a little bit of the stitching in here. I'm going to flip it here, which I should have done a long time ago. I like to work on it backwards a little bit so I can work out the things that are unbalanced. And now I'm really going back and forth with a regular brush, my mixer brush, and here and there a smudge. Now you can do all this without a smudge and just use your kind of wet into wet tools and soften edges, and use your mixer brush with no color in it to soften edges and things like that. And again, you could really dial them in with really interesting brushes. And I'm going to light up the front of his beard a little bit here. It's not really that lit up in the reference, but that's fine. You got to change things to make them a little more interesting. And I usually just run through the color spectrum to see if I like anything better, but the neutrals works fine. I do want to play around with the values in the background. And again, I'm going really wet into wet. I think I have it sample all layers here, so it's picking things up. And, you know, that way I can lighten up and darken up specific areas where I need the value. I just made a selection here because I just noticed I lost a big block of value. So I'm just going to put that back in, use the shadow value, use a gradient, and just put it on overlay, and that'll soften the edge. Just to reunify that under his bill. And the overlay is a multiply. Now I'm really looking where I can punch some darks, some lights. Putting this little lighter value on his beard, has a little bit of yellow in it. And then I'm just looking for little temperature shifts and things like that. And he's got some of his flesh tone mixed into under his hair, because his hair is probably a little bit thin. So I want to dance some of that in there. And I'm also noticing that some of the grays I have mixed in his hair is actually should be warmer values, because it's really just his flesh tone showing through. And I want to soften this. And again, I'm lighting up the front of the beard a little bit. And he's got some warmth in the shadow under his beard there. And I like to pull the hair over that. And now I'm just dancing some of that around and just looking for little tweaky things. I mean, obviously normally I'd probably go a lot further with this. And I'm not going to do a shirt right now because I think this is enough just for the discussion. So I just pull some individual hairs here. And if you notice, you got to have that mass first. And then you can pull the individual hairs. And that silhouette read will read as much more complex. You don't want to put too much of that. It'll start to look like spaghetti. But I'm going to leave this here. I think this is enough for our discussion we're going to have in class. So we'll go over it more in class, all the controls and all that sort of thing.